When I was 21 years old, something happened to me that my friend described as the juiciest revenge or karma story he'd ever heard. He suggested I share it here for anyone who has ever experienced being cheated on by someone they loved. I was single after being in a 5-year relationship with my ex-boyfriend, and I had finally found the courage to tell my junior high school crush, whom I'll call DN, about the feelings I'd harbored for him since we first met 7 years earlier. I was still relatively new to the Pacific Northwest, having left my home in Alaska. I thought to myself, well, he's in Alaska, I'm here, and I'm never moving back, so I might as well express what's been left unspoken, face the likely outcome, and move on with my life. I had a strong suspicion that once I revealed my feelings, our friendship might change, or he would gently reject me with a statement like, "I don't see you that way." At most, I expected an awkward conversation that might help him understand my past behavior around him. To my complete surprise, he reciprocated my feelings with a sincere expression of love. Dean and I had been friends for all those years, and while I never dropped hints to him about my feelings, I had confided in my closest friend at the time. We had even shared a kiss during our first year at school, but I refrained from pushing further and let him take the lead, which he never did. His words to me were poetic and full of promise, including statements like, "I've always had feelings for you, but never knew how to approach you," and "I was afraid of rejection and humiliation." It echoed the very things I had told him. 7 years later, after his unexpected and incredibly heartfelt response, it made me reevaluate my decision to never move back to Alaska. I had been so certain about never returning, but now, after that phone call where we confessed our love for each other, that word never suddenly seemed overly absolute. Perhaps relaxing that decision could open up the possibility for the romantic relationship I had longed for all those years. I had the wonderful privilege of having a family member who was a pilot, which allowed me to frequently fly on buddy passes, standby tickets. So, I made the decision to fly up to Alaska every few weeks to be with Dean. When the news spread, our circle of friends would exclaim, "OMG, you plus Dean. I always hoped you two would end up together. You were the perfect couple." At first, I found it cheesy and romantic, but it felt validating and heartwarming because that's exactly what I had hoped people would say about us. Throughout my time at school, I had been very careful not to date or even flirt with anyone, as I wanted to avoid interpersonal drama and school gossip that might disrupt my education. After several months of traveling to be with Dean, he proposed to me, and I happily said yes. Without hesitation, I began planning my move back to Alaska to start our life together in our hometown. I made all the necessary arrangements for my move, packing up the limited belongings I had and parcel shipping them. Fortunately, I didn't own much at that point since I was still quite young and didn't have any furniture. Dean and I were going to live together at his place, where he had a roommate we'll call Bicycle Man, BM. BM is someone I'll never forget, and the reason for that is just around the corner. In the few days leading up to my final flight back to Anchorage, I started feeling unwell. After enduring several days of discomfort, I trusted my intuition and took a pregnancy test. It revealed that I was indeed pregnant, and I was filled with joy. I couldn't wait to share the news with Dean, so I called him one evening. However, when I got him on the line, he began telling me about a girl who had come to the party at his place that evening, whom he nicknamed T-Choti, an acronym used for lack of a better one, purely for humor. I was annoyed by the way he was talking about her and realized it wasn't the right moment for a big revelation. I might have even warned him not to do anything he'd regret. He asked me to call him later to share the news, so I agreed. But later that night, when I called, someone answered and told me Dean couldn't come to the phone. That's when my stomach sank, and I had an inkling of what was happening. To my disappointment, Dean never returned my call that evening. The next morning, I tried calling him again, but there was no answer. My heart was heavy. That evening, I finally managed to talk to him, and, reminding him that I had news to share, he abruptly interrupted me, making my stomach turn. He confessed that he had cheated on me with THOD during the night I'd been trying to reach him. I couldn't believe it. I hung up the phone and felt so sick that I ended up throwing up. To my surprise, he didn't call me back to inquire about my news. I eventually called him to express my anger and disappointment. He pleaded for forgiveness, admitting it was a mistake, and still wanted me to come there. I made it clear that there was no way I would marry him after such a betrayal. I emphasized that what he did wasn't a mistake but a conscious choice. I informed him that I would be coming to collect my things, and after that, I would be gone for good. It was incredibly difficult to maintain my composure and express my thoughts without yelling. During that week, I experienced a miscarriage, adding to the immense pain I was already feeling. Not only did the person I had longed for all those years turn out to be insincere about a committed relationship after proposing to me, but I also had to endure the loss of my first pregnancy. To add to my woes, I had to make the trip to Anchorage weeks before Christmas to collect all the belongings I had previously parcel shipped there. I had no other place to go, so I ended up waiting at Dean's house. I had to face him and be around him after my heart had been thoroughly crushed. It was even more challenging because I knew all our mutual friends and family would eventually learn the truth or be subjected to whatever lies Dean might concoct to save face about his mistake. I didn't know Dean to be that kind of person, but then again, I also didn't know him to be a cheater. So I couldn't predict what course of action he would take. I got on the plane, flew north to Alaska, and, of course, Dean either forgot or didn't think it was worth picking me up at the airport. I was left stranded and forgotten, which was an incredibly humiliating and dreadful experience. To make matters worse, an elderly couple at the airport saw me waiting alone, sensed my distress, and kindly asked if I was okay. I couldn't keep my composure and broke down in tears at the airport. I sent them away, unable to hold it together long enough to accept their help graciously. I eventually managed to hail a cab and made my way to his place. I knocked loudly on the door, waiting until my fingertips went numb and the noise finally roused BM. He let me in, and I found Dean passed out in his room. I settled on the living room couch and waited. I didn't quite know how to confront him, so I didn't. Dean was already aware of how I felt, as we had discussed it during our phone call following his confession. To protect my reputation and avoid being labeled as a crazy ex, I acted like I no longer cared. I remained cool and dispassionate, treating the situation as a matter-of-fact end to our relationship. I kept to myself as much as possible. Dean, however, seemed to interpret my behavior as if we were just friends, as if our prior relationship, engagement, and the fact that I had moved to be with him had never occurred. He then had the audacity to invite THOD over to meet me. Dean conveniently omitted any details about our relationship, our engagement, my frequent visits, or my relocation to be with him. It was as though he had erased and discarded me entirely. Every moment between my arrival and departure felt like an endless cycle of tears and excruciating pain that shattered my world. I had made tremendous sacrifices for this relationship, leaving behind my family who had all relocated to the Pacific Northwest. I even quit my job to move back to Alaska and be with Dean. I was so invested in the idea of a future with him that it didn't feel like a sacrifice at the time, but it suddenly became clear how I had left behind my family and career for his empty promise of love. The realization that I had given up the support of my family and a stable job for someone who had hurt me so deeply was overwhelming. As the news spread among our mutual friends and his family, no one could fathom why Dean and I had broken up. While they empathized with my emotional turmoil, they struggled to comfort me in the face of constant tears. I strived to maintain my composure, determined to avoid the stereotype of being a crazy ex. This entire ordeal unfolded in front of people who had known both of us for years, and they were utterly perplexed by Dean's actions, particularly his involvement with THOT. I stayed mostly silent and only provided factual responses when questioned. I acknowledged, yes, Dean has chosen to be with her. I'm here temporarily, awaiting my belongings so I can ship them back, and then I'm catching the next flight out of here. During the approximately 2 weeks I spent there, one day, BM, remember him? Emerged from his room, saw me silently shedding tears, and bluntly stated, Dean is a total asshole. If I were you, I would be crying too. Oddly, that simple comment managed to provide some solace in the midst of my emotional turmoil. BM's imposing presence, as a strong and confident individual, reassured me that the world wasn't entirely cruel. I had kept the pregnancy and its tragic loss a secret from everyone. I was grieving and in physical pain, but I knew that if I shared any of that, I'd be dismissed as a crazy ex concocting stories to make DN feel worse, or as someone making it all about poor me. I simply couldn't bear any more unnecessary drama on top of what I was already enduring. So I suffered in silence, mastering the art of crying without a sound to avoid drawing attention to my sorrow. Throughout those 2 weeks, DN frequently invited Chody over, perhaps assuming it wouldn't affect me. He didn't consider my feelings or how his actions were impacting me. I was in a state of shock, never imagining he would treat me this way after knowing him for so long and never witnessing such behavior. I remained on the couch as they indulged in their activities in DN's room, clearly within earshot. It was such a cruel move that I'm still surprised it didn't immediately earn him a spot in the dictionary under the definition of sociopath. I was utterly drained and lacked the emotional strength to confront DN or explain to him why his actions were cruel and heartless. If he didn't already understand that, my words wouldn't teach him the basics of empathy. I was so furious with him that I wanted to make him suffer more than he had made me suffer. So, before leaving, I devised a plan to sabotage his new relationship with Chody, which is where the revenge scheme comes into play. As a bisexual person, I was aware that Chody had at least some flexibility in her orientation, and given her willingness to rush into things with someone new, I saw an opportunity. At another party night, which seemed like a regular occurrence at their house, I managed to spend time alone with Chody before she got too intoxicated. I drew her into DN's room, while everyone else was becoming too drunk to notice our absence. DN was occupied with the other guests and might not have realized we were missing. Afterward, I explained to her why I was there and shared my history with DN. With a cold and dispassionate tone that revealed how dead to me DN had become, I warned her, if he can propose to me and then do what he did with you, after all these years I've known him, just imagine what he might do to you. Suddenly, Chody understood why I had been so reserved when I was introduced to her. She had no knowledge of my real role in DN's life. She was oblivious to why I was in Alaska, waiting for boxes, or anything about our past. Chody felt profound guilt and remorse, even though she had been completely deceived. Despite this, I had remained composed and didn't cause a scene at the house party or in front of others, as one might have expected. When I had a private conversation with Chody, I divulged everything, including how my feelings for DN had developed since I was just 12 years old due to my adolescent hormones not understanding better. DN happened to walk in on our conversation, and he might have assumed that everything was fine simply because nothing violent or awful was occurring at that moment. There was no direct confrontation, yet again. The party continued, and eventually, Chody left. The following day, DN inquired about my interaction with Chody. In response, I told him she was an easy encounter, and I'm not surprised you managed to hook up with her on the same day you met her. I did the same thing. ETA, I didn't view her that way. I made that statement to her because it was the most emasculating thing I could think of. The expression on his face made it seem like his confidence had utterly vanished. He looked more embarrassed than I had ever seen him before. I maintained my poker face, and he seemed completely at a loss for words, eventually changing the subject. I had succeeded in making him feel as insignificant as he had made me feel, or so I believed. But the story doesn't end there. I eventually received my belongings, shipped them back to their origin, and caught another flight out of there a day or so later, never crossing paths with Chody again. I didn't hear from DN for the next 5 years. 5 years later, I was married and had recently discovered that I was pregnant with my first child. I received an email from DN. He had managed to find me through social media in 2005. He expressed a desire to catch up with me, and out of curiosity, I agreed to a phone call, anticipating the chance to gloat about my marriage and impending parenthood. DN shared with me all the stories of the karma that unfolded after I left. He said something along the lines of, "You didn't go crazy while you were here, but whatever you did planted a seed that grew into something that destroyed my life." While those might not be his exact words, it's a close approximation. The use of the word cancer came up somewhere in the conversation. It's possible that my intention to avenge my lost pregnancy attracted some kind of otherworldly intervention. In chronological order, here's how karma unfolded. 1. T. Chody cheated on DN with his best friend, moving in with the guy just 2 weeks after my departure. Ouch. 2. He got fired from his job on Christmas Eve. His boss, a mutual friend who had heard about his actions toward me, decided he no longer wanted him at his video store. Ouch. 3. His truck broke down in front of an electrical station and was impounded. Without a job and money, he couldn't retrieve it, and he lost his truck as well. Ouch, especially in the Alaskan winter. 4. His family discovered the details of what had transpired between me and him and disowned him. Ouch. The specifics of what they heard remained a mystery to me, but I chalked it up to karma. 5. Following Thought's departure, DN's remaining friends threw another drinking party at his place. This time, they got him extremely drunk, beat him up, and threw him out into a snow berm before locking him out of his own home. He found refuge with a neighbor, but ultimately had to leave the state due to losing all his friends, job, family, truck, and now single, without even T. Chody to rely on. Ouch. During our conversation, DN had been living in Texas and reevaluating his life. He expressed curiosity about how I was faring after our so-called friendship ended. It was at that moment that I made the decision to reveal the existence of the baby we could have had. As we spoke, I recounted the challenges I had faced in coming to terms with the lost pregnancy, emphasizing how difficult it was for me, as I had felt unable to share this with him earlier due to the reasons I previously mentioned. Then, distinguished guests, something remarkable happened. DN began to cry. His tears flowed, and I continued, describing the pain I had endured, feeling that I couldn't open up about my pregnancy at the time. In the midst of his sobbing, DN uttered, "I had no idea you were pregnant." This statement triggered a momentary surge of indignant anger within me. Nevertheless, I managed to maintain my composed demeanor, responding matter-of-factly and devoid of emotion. We engaged in an intimate relationship, so the possibility of pregnancy was never impossible. I had tried to inform you, but back then, you were more focused on confessing your regrettable choices than listening to my revelation. Your lack of awareness regarding my pregnancy stemmed from your lack of concern or inquiry. The other end of the line was filled with more sobs and apologies than I had ever heard from anyone in my life. I decided to conclude our conversation by saying, "It's really okay. I don't hate you." I wanted to express my pity, but chose not to. Things are better for me now. I'm married, and we just found out that we are pregnant with our first child. Anyway, it's been nice catching up with you and learning about your life. I'm sorry to hear it's been difficult. Let's keep in touch. However, he didn't. It remains a mystery why he reached out in the first place, as he must have anticipated the challenging nature of that call. Yet, he probably didn't expect to discover that he could have been a father, and that we could have built a family together if he hadn't shattered the heart of someone who genuinely cared about him. In hindsight, I realized that our so-called relationship was nothing more than my confusion between his charm, his eloquent words, and my infatuation, mistaking it for genuine love. I spent a significant amount of time wondering what I had done to deserve everything he did to me. But what I failed to recognize was that he didn't take those actions because of me or as punishment. He did it all because he was only thinking about himself. It took me many more years to identify narcissistic behavior, and looking back, I understand that I narrowly avoided becoming trapped in Alaska in a romantic relationship with someone who lacked empathy and remorse for their actions. I discovered the art of revenge through maintaining my grace and composure, speaking only facts, containing my emotions, and keeping my demeanor intact, with the sole purpose of sowing seeds of doubt in the new woman's heart. 5 years after he shattered my heart, he cried so profusely that he could have filled a bottle with his tears, and my satisfaction was like the rain that watered the flowers on the grave of our small, departed fetus. I'm sorry, little one. Friend, how do you like this story? Write about it in the comments. Let's get 1,000 subscribers on the channel. Love you.